report. Okay, so I'm late to record this, but I guess the points again, can you guys remind me if somebody's absent to record? Because I completely, like, I space out on that recording process. Jack, that one that you missed, I actually did record, and I have it, a YouTube link. I think I finished uploading. I'll send it to you, so that way you can watch it. Okay. So what was I saying? I was talking about, oh, the B-roll, right? So B-roll isn't always like, oh, hey, I'm going to tell you about how I clean the house nonstop, and you hear my voice telling you about it, and you see it. It's not always like interesting to like see and hear exactly what someone's talking about, but like a version of that is helpful. And then ultimately, then maybe instead of you seeing me clean the house, you're seeing me, you know, clean the house and interact with the kids and do all these different things that I'm doing, and you're recording that audio well, so that way you can then ultimately bring that in potentially as B-roll. So I guess the lesson there, and what I'm trying to get at, is you need to always record as if you're going to be using every single thing that you're recording, your audio included, B-roll, interviews, all of that stuff. All right. So miking before you hit record, no matter where you are, is really, really crucial to be able to capture those moments and utilize them if you want to. Because the worst thing would be like, what if he was like, oh, I'm just going to shoot this, and, you know, like, I'm not going to use the audio, I'm just going to cut a few shots in of them looking at pictures, and that whole conversation would have been lost, right? Because the audio would have been recorded on the camera and sounded terrible, but instead it was actually recorded well and allowed for us to engage in that element of the story. Okay, is that something that you guys have thought about before we're talking about this, before you saw the film? Or was it like, did you think that like when you go into a scenario where you're shooting B-roll, you wouldn't have to necessarily record the audio the same way or the same level of attention? Anyone?
I think starting off, I didn't understand the importance of audio, but now, like, I guess after watching the film festival several years now,
yeah,
I think I've realized like the importance of like empty noise and like, I don't know,
ambient sounds. Yep,
ambient
all that.
sound.
Yeah, because if you have ambient sound or you don't have the ambient sound, it can just like, it just sounds off, or you hear the cuts of the audio and those sorts of things. But even in a documentary, which I think now, especially like watching the Steve Aoki documentary or other documentaries that are out, you can see like just how gorgeous and savvy, you know, beautiful those documentaries are, right? They're not the documentaries from like the 70s or 80s, which are like shaky footage, but it's really cool that you got the story. It now needs to be kind of a combination of the both, right? Like both beautiful footage and incredibly interesting story, you know, happening at the same time. And really good audio, right? Which ultimately is the only way that you can make a good film, if you have good audio. Because without it, you're half done. You're not completely done. What else? Anything else? Any scenes that you thought like, oh, I don't know, was there anything that you felt like was scripted or unnatural, or did you feel like everything was natural?
I thought it was interesting when they went back to his high school, because it wasn't just him. They brought, I believe, his girlfriend along with him. And I feel like it's important to be sure that they have someone to talk to.
Yeah.
Because whenever I was interviewing, they would talk to me a lot. And I was like, well, I'm not really in this interview process, like for the interviews I did this weekend. So like they kept referring to me, and I was like, oh, okay. So I think it's important to have another person there for your subject to talk to. Because
sometimes
situations, like the girlfriend was the one asking the questions like they did before. So
right. And sometimes that works out well, but not all the time. So like think like there were a lot of interviews with just him, right? Sitting there, like cutting back and forth from the wide shot to the close up, right? Like, and really playing with like multiple cameras and everything, where he's alone. Sometimes people will speak differently and reveal different things depending on who they're with and where you are. So having them talk to you, or as if they're telling you the story, there's no problem with that. But if you want to vary what that feels like, then having like the girlfriend or a brother or a sister or a parent or whatever, you know, like someone else there can help to like layer those kinds of conversations. I did feel like that conversation was scripted. It didn't feel as natural as the other conversations. Like you'd think she would know about his experiences. maybe this the dynamic of their relationship she didn't know, but it didn't feel like real. I don't know. Did you guys feel that way, or did you feel like that felt real to you? Jack?
Kind of feel scripted.
It felt scripted, right, Nico? Yeah, Jack?
Yeah. I feel like, for as much as I personally liked the film, it was just, I can never trust biopics that are made about a person who's still alive, because like, not biopics, but
I
any
know what you
sort
mean.
of
Yeah.
revealing sort of look into someone's life. I mean, yeah, it's just like I can't fully trust it, because I know that the person that this is about was as involved as they were in the film, and so clearly it's not going to be it's not going to show the whole story,
Right. Right.
and so I feel like this film kind of has that general film of it, that thin layer of disbelief.
Oh, it does for you? It feels
It-
like you don't really quite believe it? I mean,
It's just like always in the back of my mind, and like whenever they're interviewing, it's like, I wonder how far away Steve Aoki is. Like, is he like right off camera, or
yeah.
is he
Yeah.
watching it in a theater somewhere and like approving each scene? He seems like a guy pretty concerned with his legacy. I think he just released a memoir in the
Oh,
past
did he?
year.
Yeah.
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 And I'm sure he's got a lot to say, but
I
he's
mean,
still
the film came out in 2016, so I don't remember when they referenced the years that it was made, but it was likely made in 14 and 15. So this is a long time ago. So that's 5 years ago, for him to be like filmed. And at that point where his career was, it was right before I think people really started, or right around people were really starting to like hate on him, and so maybe it was like out of a desire for people to get to know him a little bit better. And it ultimately did show a lot of, personal information as far as his family dynamic and, the pain that his mother must have gone through, and how close he is to her and wasn't to his father, but still held his father on a pedestal. And, so making him more vulnerable in a way. And maybe even if it was his intent to have this film made, maybe and usually what will happen is people will talk more or reveal more than they really intended to, so it might be that information wasn't information that he intended to talk about, but really did make him more accessible and interesting. So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, after seeing this, I kind of want to see a documentary about his dad and like
About his dad. Yeah.
his career and what he did.
Yeah, I didn't even know that he was his dad, or that his dad owned Benihana. Like when we were growing up in New York, we went to Benihana. Like that's where you went. Like for a fun, awesome meal. And so when I watched the film for the first time, I was just like, get out of here! I had no idea. But like, I never followed Steve Aoki. I didn't really know much about him. Like my club days ended a long time ago, and it was before Steve Aoki. So like, that's a different life, and so when I started learning about him, again, for me, I think like knowing his background helped me to feel like he was like a worthwhile, a person worthy of like his reputation in music, because of his experience and everything. So it helped me to really like enjoy him and the film. What else? Anything else? Anything else that you felt like was Jaleesa? Yeah.
I think I'm gonna like add to what Sweeney said. I was watching the film with someone else, and we both were like looking at each other like, oh damn, I wish they had like a documentary talking about the siblings and like the brother, the mom, and like because these people had like so much that they went through, and it was just like, wow, I want to know about you too. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think that means it's a successful film, like if it makes you want to know more, that your learning doesn't end with the film, but that it inspires you to do more research on like the siblings or his father or whomever. And like that really does speak to, I think, a more successful film than one that like, oh, that was okay. Yeah, that was all right. And you're done. Like you don't think about it again. So that's interesting. Did you guys, were there any particular visuals? Like I think Abby talked about the stop motion of the images, right? Taking place. like when the club scene with all his friends and all that stuff. Did anybody else have any visuals in particular? Nico was talking about like the really extreme wide angle lenses giving you that perspective of being on stage and making us feel like we knew what his experience was like when he's on stage, and that energy and what that feels like, because I think that was conveyed well. Were there any other visuals for you that you felt like, wow, that I love the way that they did that interview, or they lit it, or I really liked how did they, you know, now we have gimbals so we can follow better, you know, but I think Nico maybe was first, and then Jaleesa.
That last one when he's doing Laoki, when the transitions between him DJing and throwing cakes to his dad's restaurants and chefs, like that was like the coolest back and forth, like I don't know how long, minute or whatever it was, just because it was like him doing his normal thing of like leaving his legacy, throwing cakes at people, when it went from a cake to a piece of sushi flying to a customer. Like it was so thought out, and it was like so cool. They got all the shots they needed, and then they looked at the shots for like at the chef in the kitchen and stuff like that, and then edited it. It looked so good.
Yeah, that was really cool, because I think that it also like really honed in on, even though, you know, Steve Aoki is trying to be his own person, ultimately he is playing a version of his father, you know, which I think like we all do to some degree, right? We play a version of our parents, whether we want to or we don't want to. We just have to figure out how to modify what that version is to make it our own. So he's modified that with cakes instead of sushi, but the energy and the crowd and the attention, and like he loves all that just like his father did, you know? And so and really, if he had children, he can't travel, or maybe he could travel 360 days out of the year, but like he's not going to have the relationship with his kids that his father couldn't have with him because of his lifestyle as well. So it's really interesting when you hear him kind of criticize that, but ultimately, again, I keep using the word ultimately, but like ultimately he, you know, took that lesson from his father and kind of adopted it in his own way, you know, and that was revealed through that edit that you're talking about, you know?
Yeah, no, that's the message I was getting.
Yeah.
And then I like that, like right after all that craziness and the cut back and forth in his father's restaurant, it went just to like an overview of like the city, which is basically where y'all started. So like it was like he built up this legacy like his dad, and this is the city where he started. So I kind of like the way they ordered everything.
Yeah, that's another good point. Jaleesa, I think you want to say something, and then we'll go to Jack after.
I think like the quick cuts were really cool, especially like they did it a lot when they were showing him like performing, but there's like one specific scene where it's like he has foggers on his hands, and it's just like cutting back and forth between shots, and it was really quick, but then like one is gonna be like fast paced and the other one's like in slow motion. It was so cool because like you feel the energy. Like I don't know, those shots are really interesting, and I feel like the editing was done really well, for especially to portray the energy in like the concerts.
Yes. And so you have a combination of two things that convey energy. Well, there's more than two, but two visual elements that convey energy. One is how you move the camera, right? Planning out the kind of shots that you want to have. How fast is it going to move? How slow? Are you zooming in? Are you pulling out? Are you sliding? Are you jibbing, right? Like, are you whip panning? Like, what are you doing that's going to really help convey that energy visually? And then how do you cut that whip pan to another whip pan, right? Which is basically the cake to the sushi, is like that kind of style, right? Where they like become one shot because that movement is mimicked from one to the next. So planning that out, or maybe getting super lucky and finding footage that they could, you know, mirror or continue that edit with. But it really is about like organization to make that happen. And so it's camera movement, and it is the speed of your editing. Your edit should not, we started this in 200. You should not have every 5 seconds, I have a cut. Every 5 seconds, right? It creates like a visual monotony. And when that happens, what happens? We get bored, right? We're not really like paying attention anymore. We're like, oh God, when is this going to change? Or if a scene is more than like, or a shot is more than 10, 15 seconds, what are we doing? We're now looking at our phones, like listening, but not looking, right? Because it's not changing for us fast enough. So really thinking about those visual elements. And I think that like a film like this one is one where, you know, I don't look at my phone as much. I don't want to pick it up and look at it for a visual break. I am like engaged in it the whole time, because it's beautiful, it sounds interesting, it's bringing us into the story, and the visuals are constantly cutting or moving or slow-moing or doing, you know, like that stop motion, like it's changing in so many ways that it keeps us fully engaged in it. And so that's something that I really want you guys to hone in this semester, especially those of you who are seniors, you know. And then Jaleesa and Abby, for next year, this is going to be so important for you to think about, like, this is not, your films are not just about like a story, it's not just about having good camera work, it's how does the editing really play a part in like conveying energy, you know. Actually, by the way, next semester when I'm teaching, I don't know if I told you guys this yet, but I am going, instead of teaching cinematography, because you guys have all, you know, basically been in that, I don't have to worry about that so much in this class, but a lot of the cinematography is going to be incorporated in documentary and narrative, or it already is kind of incorporated. I'm going to actually teach, instead of cinematography, advanced editing. So that way we can really go over, yeah, like flow and styles of editing, from like, you know, whether it be documentary to narrative to drama to comedy, you know, and really playing on those edits. So if you guys wanted to take it, you can take it for additional credit. So 340 is a special topics course. So you can take it as many times as you want, as long as it's a different class, for additional credits. So you wouldn't lose the credit you had and replace it with this. It would just be 3 additional or 4 additional credits. Yeah, Jaleesa.
I was looking at the syllabus, and are we going to be working with the CJ class?
No, don't ignore that. I remember I have to like refine the syllabus, and I have to take some of that stuff out. I thought I took most of it out, but I must have missed it in a couple places. In the past, the documentary class did work with CJ, where actually we couldn't end up working with them as much as we wanted to, because there are limitations that are in the humanities. They're regulated by a board that has to basically approve what they're doing when they're working with the public, because of privacy issues and papers being published and all of that. We don't fall under those same guidelines because we're in the arts, which is wonderful. And because of that issue, though, we couldn't actually pair with them. So it ended up being about subject matters related specifically to criminal justice, whether it be an organization like, did you guys go to that screening a few years ago? It was, we held it in the Fine Art Lecture Hall, and they were wonderful films about WISE. So for women who are coming from a variety of backgrounds who live in special housing, to juvenile probation or juvenile offenders, and then adult probation. So, you know, so really, they were really, really interesting interviews and interesting films. But we're not going to do that this semester because of COVID also, you know, like I'm not going to send you guys into WISE housing when I don't know what they're doing in there, if they're, you know, sanitizing or not, or what people's lifestyles are like, and then putting you guys in those scenarios. So we're going to have to kind of navigate, you know, where it's safest for us to make that final film. Yeah. And you don't have to, well, I don't even know what the final film is going to be, actually. So if you knew that, like, for example, you have a friend who's a criminal justice major and you've always been interested in this one thing they talk about, and you want to, you know, interview probation officers or a police officer downtown, you know, you could use them to help you to research the history of it and have them come in as like a producer on your film. You know, these don't have to be independently done, like, and isolated. They'll definitely, you know, you can utilize other people. And then in the end, I think what we're going to do is pair you guys, you know, together. You guys can come up with your own partners for your films. So that way you're not taking on all that responsibility by yourself, but you're balancing it out. If you want to do it independently, I'm open to that conversation. This is nothing definitive. It's just really, in the past, I had more students in documentary, and we had 4 films, I think, or 3 films, and there are 4 students or 3 students on each film. So they could balance like the interviews, the B-roll footage capturing, all that stuff, and then, you know, share their final film. And as we know, there's pros and cons to that, right? Like sometimes it can be so incredibly useful, and other times you could think like, God help me, this is so hard to rely on someone else to do something. So, you know, I don't want to put rules on that, but I want you guys to really think about it and maybe, you know, choose to consider partnering again in a way. All right. What else? What other questions do we have or comments about the film? Jack, what were you going to say?
Yeah. So earlier when we were talking about the sushi scene,
Yeah.
David Gelb, he was a producer on this, and I think he was like the only name I recognized, but he did Jiro, Dreams of Sushi. He was that guy, and which is another great documentary. And I definitely noticed, like, because in that film, I don't think it's the same filmmaker, but they do the same like story out of sync. You know,
Oh,
like
interesting. Yeah.
they're talking about Jiro. He's the sushi chef, and they don't get to his like actual biography until like halfway through the documentary. Like they're just focusing on what he's doing now or recently, and then they move backwards into his life.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that there's like styles, right? Like people have styles of film that they like to make, or a style, you know, they have an editing style, they have an editor that they work with regularly. And so usually people like will stick with one style because that's how they're what they're known for, right? And so maybe that's what he does. Like he's developed this style that, you know, ended up influencing, you know, the film that they worked on with Aoki. Yeah. Anything else? Any other points or parts? Nico.
One other thing I liked was the title at the end, because of the statement that he said right before it showed up. Like, I'll sleep when I'm dead, and it just kind of proved the point even more. I was like, all right, chills. That was cool.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so interesting when you hear like, you know, he's, you know, contemplating his life and the trajectory and like his high paced everything. And then this whole LA thing happens and he's just talked about his father. And so, and then what is he? He's back in it again. It's almost as if like he's addicted to it, like he can't get away from it, you know? And so that philosophy of like living that way is, well, that clearly, like, it's something that even if he can reflect on it, he's not going to change from, because that's just kind of his makeup, you know. That was his father's influence, and also, you know, who he's developed into as a person.
I really like the title too, because like as we were going out the documentary, I was really scared that he was just gonna say it, and I was like, I wouldn't include that. But they kept the concept of like sleep and rest throughout the whole thing, being like, here's your work life, but you need a social life too, and like just how he's like saying, when am I gonna sleep, like on the plane, like throughout all of his concerts. But like that was just a clever way to like keep it in your mind, but not straight up say the title.
Right. And then, well, when you get to the point where you have to go to the doctor because you're, you know, you're losing your voice and you're, you know, having like all of these problems and everything, like your body's telling you that you need to slow down, but he's not able to slow down. You know, it's like, it's just kind of, yeah, I think that's a good point too, that like it's raised, it's there, you know what it is. And then it's kind of like everything culminates in this like moment in the end that, sorry, there was something on my screen, that, you know, shows us, or tells us again, just to reinforce what we've been seeing the entire time. So it's well organized, very well organized, and beautiful, right? Like really visually stunning. Some of the footage is footage that you could tell that they got from someone else, right? Of concerts or other things, or old footage of his father. You could tell when they were shooting the film, right? Versus like pulling in, you know, other footage that they had to utilize, again, for those live events that maybe they weren't always at, or from the past. But it was beautiful, like framed well, moved well, knew when they wanted to do slow motion, because you have to plan for that, right? Because you have to shoot basically at a really high frame rate. The higher the frame rate, the more detail you have in the slow motion, right? The slower the frame rate. So if you're shooting at 1,000 FPS, you're going to get all those beautiful, like little tiny flecks of cake flying slowly through the air. If you're shooting at a frame rate of 250, it's still going to be slow, but it's going to move, right? So like what frame rate and what cameras are what are they capable of? So the faster the frame rate, the more detail you're gonna really be able to see in those slow motion moments. But they were very carefully planned out, you know, as additional moments in the film that they thought would help to emphasize, you know, that feeling, you know, or that moment. So planning those things out, whether during or prior to, I think is important in your process.
Do you feel the funeral scene was like not reenacted, but like they were just going and visiting the
like when it looks like they're gonna go skiing, right? Where you have the sticks
no,
at
whenever
first, that one? I mean,
whenever they told the story about his father passing away.
Do I feel like it was reenacted?
Yeah.
Let me look at it again. Hold on, I have the film up. Let me make this smaller. I can't answer that until I see it. Do you remember when in the film it was? At what points? Like, was it halfway through? Anybody know?
No, don't remember.
Let me see here. Hold on.
Definitely do think
If you knew the time code around the time code of what it was, I could tell you for sure.
Sorry, I don't know the time code.
Let me see here. I think it was later in the film. I'm trying to find it, so I can't answer that. Does anybody else have an opinion on that while I'm scanning through to try to find that scene?
It's around the 50-minute mark.
50 minutes? Thank you. That's right where I was. So like when we're seeing the, let's see, 50.
52-ish? Oh no, that's when he's got the black jacket on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Abby, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I don't know why I'm blanking on that.
Oh, so basically him and his family come to the grave and like they're...
Oh yeah, that's what I was talking about. Yeah. Oh, so that was what I was talking about. Okay. I'm like, was there something else that I didn't see that like I completely missed? So when he has the sticks with the sticks that are there, he has the black jacket on. I'm sure that was like, hey, let's go to your dad's. Can we visit him and film you guys, you know, paying your respects, you know, and that's what that was. I don't know if it was like acted out, like as if it were, what was it like when I was here? Right? Because like if someone said to me, I want to do, you know, a film where you're going to visit your grandparents' graves, like I would still be emotional, even if like they said, hey, let's do that. You know, it's not like that emotion or that engagement with my family wouldn't happen whether someone was there filming it or not. But I don't think they're pretending to go there, because like a reenactment is like, let's reenact something that already occurred and try to like make it as, you know, in line with what happened in that moment. I think it was a legitimate moment that they were recording. Does that answer your question?
I was just wondering like how it would be like if you just asked someone being like, hey, let's just go to your father's, you know, gravestone, and just for a hope of like to get an emotional moment from like more people, things like that.
I think that you have to ask it in a certain way, you know, not like a, hey, let's go to your father's grave, you know, but like more of like a, you know, you're talking to me a lot about your father and I can see how important he was to you. Do you think that there's a possibility that I can follow you and your family as you go to visit him and maybe capture, you know, the connection that you guys have when you're visiting him, you know? And that I think might get a yes answer, you know, because it's again about how you phrase it. It's just like dating. If you're like, how many people have you dated? How many people have you been with? How many people have you right? Someone's gonna be like, whoa, hold up a second. Like, that's a little intense, you know, but if you're like, oh, so what was your last relationship like? I don't know, like then you're going to get more information and they'll be more willing to kind of feed it to you. But it really comes from, you know, how you ask something to determine the response. Okay. Anybody else? Anything else? Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to let you guys go then, okay? And I'll say thank you very much for the time that you've spent, you know, talking about this. And I hope, I'm looking forward to seeing your work on Wednesday. So remember, 8 a.m., just mentally, that is a deadline, 8 a.m. Please, please don't be exporting your film when I come in, because what I can get off the computer in that moment is what I'm getting and I'm out. Like I'm not sticking around and waiting for a 5-minute or even a 3-minute additional download. So just please drill that deadline into your heads, okay? And then I'm going to take those files. I'm going to come back to my home. And then when you guys are watching your files, I'm going to be watching them on my end. Okay, so I'm going to leave them on the teacher station. You guys can play them from there so everyone can watch them together. And then I will watch them at home, and then we will talk about them together. All right, and give critique. Just in case anyone does have any more questions, I'm hoping that my email was clear, but you're giving me one file. Each of the interviews will be in the file, okay? So if you have 45 seconds to a minute per person, your file ultimately will be around 4 minutes, maybe a little bit over. And you're gonna have a space in between each interview that just has the person's name on a black screen, like nothing fancy. I don't need fancy lower thirds yet or anything like that. It's just, it'll help us to separate the interviews, and we'll know when to pause or which ones to go back to have conversation about it. And start with your strongest interview, okay? So the plan is to watch all 4, but I would say at minimum, I would like to watch at least 2. So the first 2 should be your strongest interviews, all right? Now, if there's anything from the next 2 that you want us to watch or discuss, so you could say like, look how well these other 2 went, and that third one was just like a bomb, and I can't figure out why it's not working. Like, can we look at that to see what might have happened? We can absolutely look at it and see what happened, but I'd rather give you guys like more detailed critique on the first 2 rather than critiquing all 4 and kind of rushing through and not spending time like addressing some of the details. Okay. All right. So we'll talk about the first 2. I will watch all 4 no matter what, but if you want to address number 3 and 4, we can do that, you know, at some point in the critique, if that's what you'd like. Okay. Okay. All right. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Okay.
All right.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah.
See ya.